I wanted to take a moment of time with our incredible advisor, Dr. Abbie Maroño, to discuss some of the deeper trends and topics that we're seeing with relation to AI and human behavior and the interaction between those two things. AI is obviously front and center for many people from a personal and business perspective. And there are lots of questions out there that are pretty like surface level. Everyone's talking about how and whether you should use AI to help create content and Gen AI and all that. But I guess the question and topic, Abbie, that I wanted to discuss today is like, what are some of the trends you're seeing that go a little deeper in terms of how the use of AI, maybe our dependence on AI, and also tech more broadly, and the way that that might be impacting human behavior from like a person-to-person interaction?
It's a really interesting question. And I think it has a negative and a positive indirect effect. It really depends on how we use it. So there's no denying that there is becoming an over-reliance on AI and technology in general for things like, let's say, marketing, um, creation of content. So we are utilizing AI now more than we are in person contact. We're not marketing in person. We're not taking meetings so much because we don't need to. We're being more convenient and efficient using AI. But what's happening is it's reducing social contact, it's reducing social connection. And when this happens over time, what we tend to do and what we tend to see is the reduction in nonverbal intelligence. So nonverbal communication or effective nonverbal communication is a muscle. It's a skill just like any other. And if you stop training a skill, you become less efficient in that skill. So when we limit our social contact with people because now we are being more efficient in the use of AI and tech, we're not working those muscles. And we've seen this, for example, when the pandemic happened and people were not socially communicating in person, and it was all through social media, text, phone calls, things like that. When the pandemic lifted and people went back into schools and colleges and workplaces, we saw a reduction in nonverbal awareness, and people didn't know how to communicate again. There was a real struggle, and there was a significant reporting of people struggling with social communication, particularly nonverbal communication.
Right. I feel like there's so much to unpack with that, right? Because there's this impact or influence of people relying maybe on AI, but also just
Yeah.
tech and screens in general, right? Like you think about the way that we use our phones to text communicate or have phone calls with people. And then of course, video as a means to connect with other people. All of that, all of this communicate all these different channels of communication. I know I'm not being all that eloquent, but just I think all these channels of communication have very specific ways of showing up. And I think screens can sometimes let people connect from a much more casual perspective, right? We see people showing up on video calls with still terrible framing and like barely showing, and it's somehow passable. And I
And
do agree that
cameras off.
like, what's
Cameras
that?
off also. People showing
Right,
up, but they're not actually showing up. We would
right.
go in person to a lecture, we see other people, we interact with other people, we present ourselves a certain way. We don't even need to do that on screen anymore because we can
Mhm.
turn our cameras off.
Right, right. So there's almost like, I feel like there's this epidemic of like more leniency in the
Yes.
way that people are communicating. And I think technology and AI is exacerbating that because the message that using AI and tech in this way sends is that the human to human connection and conversation is not as important or doesn't have to be super high quality if you're not in person, right? But then coming back to your earlier point, that means that then when you are in person, you realize that you have actually your communication skills and especially your nonverbal skills have significantly atrophied.
Yes. And a lot of people really prefer this. They prefer the less like typically professional and more casual look. And that's fine. That's personal preference. But we know from the literature that perception matters.
Mhm.
If you're going to do business with someone, we build a perception of whether this person is someone that we trust, whether they're someone who is confident, capable, competent, all of these things. Nonverbal communication plays a really important role into those judgments, not
Mhm.
necessarily whether that person is competent and trustworthy, but our perception of that. And our perception of that is going to drive, am I going to do a business deal with them?
Mhm.
So don't you want your team to know how to present themselves in that way most effectively? When we limit social contact, we limit the rehearsal of those nonverbal skills. And if we promote comfortable dress and, very just casual, that's fine, but it doesn't have that same social perception. And
Mhm.
that's an undeniable statistic that we see. So again, it is personal preference, but we really, as a professional, I would want to give myself the best chance at making those deals and having that best perception. Nonverbal communication is so important for that. So I want to keep working that nonverbal muscle.
Right, right. And I mean, I would argue that video is the only digital channel of communication where you can really be
Yeah.
practicing in an accountable way. Because, of course, like you can make the same argument for being on a phone call and still wanting to have an upright and open posture and using your hand gestures. You see
Yeah.
people on talking on the phone doing that all the time, right? People are waving their
Yeah.
hands about. You know, the other person on the phone, on the other end of the phone doesn't hear them. But this channel is still such a beautiful one in terms of showing up and honing those skills and noticing different nonverbals in other people as well, right? Assuming they have their
Yes.
videos on.